Dean Holloway was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in New York, known not just for his wealth but for the silence he carried like armor. His name alone could open doors, freeze boardrooms, or ignite headlines, but he rarely cared for any of it. At the top floor of his private high-rise he lived alone and bothered, unreachable, untouched by the world below. Until one evening, while stepping into his private elevator, he saw her, the girl from Three Beast, standing quietly with her head down and eyes shaded beneath a worn gray hoodie. She didn't flinch at the sight of him, didn't smile, didn't even pretend to care who he was. That intrigued him more than he liked to admit. She pressed the elevator button in silence, never looking his way, then exited before he could say a single word. And that's when something shifted in Dean Holloway, because no one ignored him. He asked the doorman her name, but was told she paid in cash and used no last name on record, just Lena. No social media number, credit history, no digital footprint, like she didn't exist. For a man who could buy information with a blink, it was unsettling not to find a single file, photo, or phone number attached to her. That night, Dean reviewed the building's security tapes, something he hadn't done in years, not for business, but for curiosity. She left her apartment only at night, always with a bag slung over her shoulder, dressed like someone running from attention. And every time she returned, she looked more tired, more hollow, like someone who never allowed herself to rest. "Are you hiding from?" Dean whispered to the screen, drawn to her shadow like a moth to fire. He didn't know it yet, but he was already caught in something deeper than intrigue. It was nearly midnight when Dean heard a soft crash in the hallway outside his door, followed by rapid footsteps. He opened the door slowly, expecting a drunk guest or late-night delivery, but instead saw Herlin kneeling together. Spilled art supplies, her hands trembling, her eyes locked onto his, wide and panicked, like a deer caught in headlights. But she didn't beg or explain. Instead, she whispered, "Please, don't tell anyone you saw me." The air between them grew heavy with something unspoken, as Dean silently bent down and helped her pick up a small tin of charcoal pencils. She clutched the supplies, like they were more valuable than gold, then disappeared down the stairs without looking back. Dean stood frozen, still holding a single broken pencil in his hand. And at that moment, he knew her secret was no ordinary one. Dean couldn't stop thinking about her, so the next night, he followed from a distance as she exited the building around 11 p.m. She took a side street, then two alleys, until she entered an abandoned art studio through a back door marked "Condemned." Inside, through a dusty window, Dean saw her painting wild, emotional strokes that filled cracked walls with beauty he didn't understand. She painted like someone escaping a scream, her hands moving fast, tears falling down her cheeks, oblivious to the world. Dean had never seen anything so raw in his life, so broken, so alive. He stayed until dawn, unseen, watching from the shadows like a man witnessing a confession. She didn't know she had an audience, and he didn't know her pain would soon become his obsession. For the first time in years, Dean skipped a shareholders' meeting, canceling appearances and ignoring press calls. His assistant was alarmed, his investors panicked. But he didn't care. He couldn't shake her face, her trembling hands, her tears falling in silence. He walked the halls of his penthouse like a ghost, replaying her voice in his head. "Don't tell anyone you saw me." She hadn't recognized him. He was sure of Etan. That fact alone made her feel more real than anyone he'd ever known. He started returning to the alley near the studio, hoping to see her again, to understand the story she never told. And when she finally appeared 3 nights later, her shoulders were hunched lower, her pace slower, as if the weight she carried was crushing her. He wanted to speak, but something in her sadness stopped him. So he stayed silent, watching her unravel in a world she kept hidden. She left it behind by accident, an old water-stained sketchbook lying near a crate outside the studio, forgotten. In her exhaustion, Dean hesitated before picking it up, but curiosity overwhelmed guilt. Inside were dozens of pencil drawings, portraits of faces in agony, in love, in desperation, and among them, one of him. Not the public version of Dean Holloway, but a raw version, only eyes, guarded expression, and hands that seemed to be reaching for something. His breath caught in his throat. She had noticed him long before he noticed her, and somehow, she had seen him. Dean tucked the sketchbook into his coat and walked away, knowing he had just crossed a line. But he also knew he would never return it until he understood why he was in it. Dean began researching abandoned art collectives and underground galleries, tracing back every name, every connection that might explain Lena's world. What he discovered shocked him. She was once known in secret circles as L.A. Street, artist who vanished after a public scandal involving a powerful patron. Rumors suggested she exposed a billionaire's illegal gallery of stolen art, and then disappeared. Dean wondered if that man had tried to silence her and if Lena was still running. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became, but he couldn't stop. He needed to know if she was hiding from a monster or simply hiding from the world. And either way, he was ready to face that darkness because something about her made him want to protect her. Even from shadows he couldn't see. For the first time in his life, money wouldn't solve what was coming. Unable to stay distant, Dean sent an anonymous envelope to her apartment, a thick wad of cash, and a simple note that read, "For your art, no strings, just light. She didn't react the next day, but later that night, she returned to the studio and for the first time, he saw her smile as she mixed new paints with fresh brushes. She didn't know who sent it, but she held the note to her chest as if it had saved her. Dean watched with a strange ache in his chest, wanting to tell her it was him, but fearing she would shut down again. She painted all night colors this time, bright and bold, like someone remembering joy. And Dean knew he wasn't watching a stranger anymore. He was falling for a girl who didn't want to be found. It was raining when he saw her stumble outside the studio, her legs weak, her face pale with exhaustion. Dean rushed forward instinctively, catching her just before she hit the ground. She looked up at him dazed, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "Why, are you here?" He carried her into the car, ignoring the questions of his driver, and brought her straight to his penthouse. For hours she slept in his guest room, wrapped in blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. When she awoke, panic filled her eyes as she recognized the skyline from the windows. "This is your home?" she asked, stunned, her voice cracking. Dean only nodded and replied, "And now it's yours too, if you want to be safe." She tried to leave, but her knees buckled again, and Dean caught her with the gentleness of someone who had never held anyone this close. "You shouldn't have helped me," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's not safe for you either." But Dean didn't flinch. He leaned closer and whispered, "I'm not afraid of your past. I only care about your future." She stared at him, in disbelief, as if no one had ever said that to her before. Slowly, painfully, she reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "If you really want to know who I am, open this." Dean took it without a word, sensing that whatever was inside would shatter everything he believed about her. He looked at her one last time before walking away and knew this wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was love. Dean waited until Lena was asleep again before inserting the flash drive into his encrypted laptop, bracing himself for anything. Inside was a single folder labeled Truth, and within it, dozens of documents, photos, and hidden video files. As he scrolled, he began to realize it wasn't about her past, it was about someone else's crimes. Powerful men exposed through her secret paintings. One video showed a private art auction with stolen works, attended by senators, CEOs, and even Dean's own former business partner. The footage was dangerous enough to ruin lives, careers, and empires. No wonder Lena had disappeared. He sat back, stunned, realizing she wasn't just hiding from a scandal, she was the reason the scandal had been buried. She had taken the fall to protect others, and had nearly destroyed herself in the process. Dean closed the laptop, his pulse racing, and whispered to the night, "She's not just innocent. She's a threat to everyone I know." Dean paced his living room at 2 a.m., torn between protecting Lena and the pressure of his own world, where silence was survival. If he revealed what he knew, powerful enemies would resurface, people who buried secrets for a living and erased those who tried to expose them. But if he did nothing, Lena would continue to suffer in the shadows, hunted and alone. He thought about the girl who painted her pain onto brick walls, the girl who had drawn him with such precision, and realized he could never walk away. He had the power to shield her, but he also had to choose which side he was really on, money or truth, power or love. When he returned to the guest room, Lena was awake, sitting on the windowsill, barefoot and quiet. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. Dean nodded and said, "And I'm still here." The next morning, Dean received a call from a restricted number voice he hadn't heard in years. Victor Lay, the same billionaire who had retired mysteriously after the stolen art scandal. "I hear you've been spending time with a ghost," Victor said coolly, his voice filled with menace. Dean didn't answer, but his silence was enough to confirm the suspicion. "Careful who you protect, Holloway. Some things are buried for a reason," Victor warned, before the line went dead. Dean stared at the phone, the weight of the threat sinking in like ice. Lena stood in the doorway behind him, having overheard just enough to go pale. "He knows," she whispered. "Then it's time we make sure the world does too." Dean replied, knowing she couldn't stay in his penthouse any longer. Dean moved Lena to a hidden property he owned, an off-grid glass cabin in the woods, designed for privacy. He assigned 2 of his most trusted men to guard the perimeter, but told no one else, not even his assistant. Lena protested, saying she didn't want him getting involved, but Dean silenced her gently. "I'm not helping you out of guilt, Lena. I'm helping because I care, because you matter to me more than any risk," he said. The words shook her more than she expected, and for the first time, she let herself fall asleep in his arms. That night, while the wind howled through the trees, Dean held her like she was something fragile and irreplaceable. And for once, Lena didn't dream of running, she dreamed of staying. The next morning, Dean found Lena sitting on the cabin floor, painting him with careful strokes, her brow furrowed in focus. He hadn't posed, and she hadn't asked it. It was like she needed to capture him while she still could. In the painting, he looked different, vulnerable, bare, and surrounded by fire that didn't consume him but revealed him. "Is that how you see me?" he asked quietly, stunned. Lena nodded, wiping her hands on a rag, and said, "You're not cold like they say, you're just waiting for someone to see you." Dean didn't know how to respond to that, but something in him cracked open. He leaned down, kissed her paint-stained hands, and whispered, "I see you too." In that moment, They weren't a billionaire and a fugitive, they were two broken people finally choosing each other. Despite all precautions, someone leaked the cabin's location. One of Dean's security staff had been bribed by Victor's network. Shots rang out one night just after 1 a.m., and Lena screamed as Dean pulled her to the floor. His men responded fast, taking out the intruder before anyone was hurt. But the message was clear, they weren't safe anywhere now. Dean fired the entire team and brought in a Black Ops level unit he'd used once for a private hostage negotiation. Overseas, Lena sat shaking in the corner as he made the call, realizing just how powerful this man really was, not just rich, but lethal, if necessary. "I won't let them touch you," he promised as he held her face in both hands. But inside, he knew the war had just started, and this time, it was personal. Later that night, Lena finally told him everything, how she had been part of a non-profit art program that exposed unethical collections, how she was manipulated, framed, and nearly imprisoned by Victor Lang. When she refused to keep silent. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice breaking, "but they destroyed everything. My name, my home, my future." Dean listened in silence, his jaw clenched and fists tight, rage simmering beneath his skin. When she finished, he pulled her close and said, "Then we'll destroy them back." Lena looked up, shocked by the conviction in his voice, but she believed him because Dean wasn't just powerful. He was willing to burn the world to protect her. Dean contacted a discreet but global investigative network and gave them the files from the flash drive in one condition: release everything anonymously. All at once, across multiple platforms. Within 24 hours, the video of the underground art auction, along with leaked documents and Lena's story, hit every major news outlet and social media feed. The world erupted. Protests, resignations, investigations, and even arrests began within days. Victor Lang vanished, and several names on the guest list were subpoenaed within hours. Lena watched it all unfold from the cabin, her hand trembling. As she held Dean's, "You just made me visible again," she whispered. "No," he replied, "I just reminded the world who you were all along." But with exposure came consequences. Lena received threats, online attacks, even a defamation lawsuit disguised as damage control. Dean's own board tried to pressure him into silence, saying he'd risked the company's reputation for a girl with a scandal. He didn't flinch. He resigned from his own empire the next day, shocking the world. "I built my fortune without them, and I'll protect her without them too," he said in a now viral press conference. Lena begged him not to do it, but he smiled and told her, "I've never felt freer." Suddenly, they were no longer hiding, they were standing in the light together, and for the first time, Lena wasn't running. With the storm passing and the truth exposed, Dean took Lena back to his penthouse. This time, not as a secret guest, but as someone he wanted the world to see beside him. They stood on the balcony, overlooking the city, the wind cool against their skin, the stars brighter than ever. "We survived it," she whispered. Dean pulled her into his chest and said, "We didn't just survive it, we changed it." That night, they lay together in the quiet glow of healing. Their bodies finally at ease, their hearts open. They kissed slowly, without fear or shame, their hands exploring like it was the first time either had known softness. And when they fell asleep, it wasn't escape, it was home. Because now, nothing was hidden anymore. Lena noticed something had changed in Dina. He smiled more, but there was a shadow in his eyes she hadn't seen before. One morning, while organizing books in his study, she found a photo of a younger Dean standing beside a grave marked Eleanor Holloway. She didn't ask at first, but later that night, she gently whispered, "Who was she?" Dean sat still for a long time, then answered, "My mother. She died protecting my name." He confessed that his fortune wasn't just in him, was built over secrets, betrayals, and the loss of the only person who ever truly believed in him. Lena touched his face softly and said, "You're not your father's legacy, Dean. You're your mother's hope." And for the first time in years, Dean cried not from pain, but from finally being seen by someone who didn't want anything from him. That night, their love deepened not through passion, but through truth. At a charity event weeks later, Dean brought Lena as his date publicly, officially, and proudly. Whispers swirled the moment they entered, her hand in his, wearing a modest yet elegant black gown and no jewelry. But then a striking woman in red approached, a former lover of Dean's, Cassandra Vale, an heiress and businesswoman with a vindictive past. "She paints lies, doesn't she?" Cassandra said coldly to Lena. Dean stepped between them, his voice calm but dangerous. "Don't mistake her silence for weakness. She's survived more than you could ever endure." The moment made headlines. The next day, and Cassandra's comment went viral for all the wrong reasons. Lena had kept her head high, but that night, she cried quietly in the shower, overwhelmed by judgment. Dean joined her in the steam, holding her tightly, whispering, "You don't need to fight them. I'm standing in front now." 2 nights later, someone set fire to the old studio where Lena once painted in secret, and arson meant as a message. The flames devoured everything, her murals, her sketchbooks, her sanctuary. When they arrived, all that remained were ashes and the faint scent of turpentine. Lena fell to her knees in the street, sobbing into Dean's chest as he wrapped her in his coat. "They keep trying to erase me," she cried, her voice breaking. Dean held her tighter, rage burning behind his calm expression. "Then we'll rebuild it bigger, brighter, unerasable," he promised. That night, he made a private purchase of an entire block downtown, and by morning, construction had already begun. Dean surprised her with it weeks later. A modern, sunlit gallery with her name carved into stone above the entrance. Lena. Every room was painted white, waiting for her colors to reclaim them. "This is too much," she whispered, tears in her voice. Dean took her hand and said, "You gave the world something real. It's time the world gave something back." She painted again boldly, this time unafraid of being seen. Each canvas a victory over the silence she once lived in. Crowds lined up to witness the comeback of the anonymous artist they once called El. And in every interview, when asked how she survived, Lena would say, "Because someone saw me when no one else did." Dean never asked for credit, but he showed up to every exhibition, proud and quiet, always with his hand in hers. But love, even the pure kind, brings old wounds to the surface. One night, after an argument over her safety and the new threats, Lena screamed, "You don't own me, Dean." His silence cut deeper than a reply, and she stormed out, not knowing where she was going. Hours passed. Dean sat alone, staring at the door, wondering if his protection had become a cage. When Lena returned near dawn, soaked in rain, she said, nothing, just stood there, crying silently. Dean approached slowly, brushing the wet strands from her face, and whispered, "I only ever wanted to keep you safe, not to keep you." And that night, they held each other like people who knew even love could be fragile. Chapter 26. The proposal. Dean didn't plan it with roses or fireworks. He simply waited for the right silence. They were watching the sunrise on the rooftop, where they first kissed, wrapped in a blanket and coffee in hand. "Marry me," he said suddenly. No ring, no performancy, just raw honesty. Lena looked at him, stunned, her heart hammering in her chest. "Why now?" she asked, barely breathing. He smiled and replied, "Because I want to be the place you never have to run from again." She didn't answer right away. She leaned in slowly, kissed his lips with trembling certainty, and whispered, "Yes, even if it scares me." As they planned the wedding quietly, news broke that Victor Lang had resurfaced on the run, but alive and bitter. A coded message was sent to Dean's office. "You think you won, but I have the final brushstroke." Lena's hands trembled when she read it, knowing Victor would never stop until someone bled. Dean, however, was done being passive. He hired a private international team, and with the help of Lena's contacts, began tracking Victor's every move. "This ends now," Dean said as he packed his bag. Lena begged him not to go alone, but he smiled gently. "I won't be gone long, but I can't let this threat follow us into forever." And then he kissed her like it might be the last time. Dean found Victor hiding in an estate off the Amalfi Coast, protected by false names and loyal guards. It wasn't easy, but Dean didn't come to negotiate. With the help of Italian authorities and the files Lena had once exposed, Victor Lang was arrested on international charges. Dean stood over him as he was handcuffed, saying only, "You buried her. Now the world buries you." The news exploded online, a billionaire capturing another, not for business, but for justice. Dean refused to speak to the media, returning home quietly, exhausted but victorious. When Lena opened the door and saw him, she didn't speak, she just cried and collapsed into his arms. And for the first time, they were truly safe. They didn't want a castle or a headline, just a moment that felt real. So they married inside her gallery, surrounded by the paintings that told their story. In front of a small crowd of friends, survivors, and those who once doubted her. Lena wore a white dress with paint-stained cuffs, her bouquet made of paper and brushes. Dean wore a black suit without a tie, his vows whispered so only she could hear them. "You gave me peace I didn't know existed," she said, placing the ring on his finger. "And you gave me fire that taught me how to live," he replied, tears in his eyes. They kissed under warm gallery lights, and the world outside fell silent, like it was bowing to their love. They woke up on a mattress in the gallery, the scent of paint and roses in the air, sunlight creeping through the skylight above. Lena watched him sleep for a while, thinking about every chapter that led them here, every silence, every secret, every war. When he opened his eyes, he whispered, "Still here?" And she smiled, brushing her nose against his. "I'll never disappear again," she said. They walked barefoot across the floor, holding hands, laughing softly as the world outside started another day. A new painting hung on the far wall, unfinished, a canvas, waiting for the next chapter. Because for them, the story was just beginning, and love, once hidden in the dark, was now written in every brushstroke. After the wedding, Lena and Dean disappeared from the spotlight, choosing a quiet countryside estate far from city chaos. Their days were filled with slow breakfasts, painting in the sunroom, and walking barefoot in the grass like two people. Reborn Lena had never known peace like this, and Dean had never allowed himself to believe he deserved it. One night, as she lay with her head on his chest, she whispered, "Do you think we've escaped it all?" Dean stroked her hair and replied, "I don't want to escape, I want to build." She smiled but stayed quiet, pressing her ear to his heartbeat. In that silence, something changed, something deep inside her that words couldn't reach. And for the first time, she wondered if she was no longer alone in her body. The test confirmed it. 2 faint pink lines that made her hands shake and her knees weak. She didn't tell Dean right away. She watched him for days, studying his smile, memorizing his laugh, wondering how to give him this news. He had always protected her, but now she would carry something that needed her to protect it too. Finally, she slipped the test into a small box, tied with ribbon, and left it on his piano. Dean opened it while she watched from the doorway, confusion turning into stunned disbelief. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You're pregnant?" And she nodded, eyes already full. He crossed the room in seconds, lifting her into his arms, holding her like a miracle. And together, they cried again, but this time for joy. As the news of the pregnancy became real, so did the resurfacing of media attention. Headlines speculated, old enemies poked at wounds. But Lena stood firm, speaking publicly for the first time in years, not as a victim, but as a voice. "No one can threaten what we've built anymore," she said on national television, her hand resting over her belly. Dean watched her with pride, knowing the girl he once found trembling in the hallway was now stronger than anyone he'd ever met. They received letters from art schools asking for her to mentor, and from survivors who saw her as proof that healing was possible. And though Dean had once built empires in silence, he now found his true legacy in her courage. She no longer hid behind him, she walked beside him. They turned the sunroom into a nursery, filling it with books, sketches, and soft fabric in pale gold and sage green. Lena painted tiny animals on the walls, each one carrying a lantern, guiding the child toward light. Dean spent nights assembling furniture he could have paid someone to build, refusing help, insisting, "I want our baby to grow up surrounded by things made with love." Every corner of that room was a promise, a vow, that this child would never know the fear its mother once carried. Lena kept a journal for the baby, sketching Dean as he read stories aloud even before there was someone to hear. One evening, Dean held her belly and felt the faintest kick. He looked up at her in wonder and said, "We're already 3. Just when peace seemed complete, a letter arrived postmarked anonymously, inside only a photograph. It was of Lena, years ago, painting in the alley behind the old condemned studios. Someone had been watching her long before Dean ever did. On the back, a handwritten note read, "I knew one day the world would see what I saw. Don't let them erase it again." There was no signature, no clue, but the image reignited something in Lena. "I want to open a school," she told Dean that night. "For kids like I was, for artists who feel invisible." Dean didn't hesitate. He smiled, took her hand, and said, "Let's make them impossible to ignore." The Holloway Foundation for Emerging Artists opened with hundreds in attendance, including young creators from all over the world. Lena stood on stage glowing and visibly pregnant, her speech a mix of nervous laughter and tearful gratitude. "I once painted in shadows because I was afraid of being seen," she said. "But now, I want every child here to know they were born to take up space." The crowd applauded, and cameras flashed, but Lena only looked at Dean, who stood in the front row, crying openly. It wasn't about status anymore, it was about meaning. And that night, under golden lights and the smell of wet paint, they danced slow and barefoot, celebrating not just what they'd survived, but what they'd created. It happened on a rainy night, just like the night they first spoke in the hallway. Lena woke with pain and quiet panic, clutching Dean's hand as he rushed her into the car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of contractions, deep breaths, and memories of every moment that brought them here. Hours past 12, then 16, and, still, no baby. Dean stayed by her side the entire time, kissing her forehead, whispering, "You're not alone. You never will be again." Finally, at dawn, with the storm clearing and sunlight bleeding through the windows, the cry of new life filled the room. Their daughter was born with wide, curious eyes and tiny hands that reached as if already searching for a brush. And Dean, holding both Lena and the child, whispered, "You're the masterpiece." They named her Eleanor Grace Holloway, in honor of Dean's mother, and the sign that once hung outside Lena's old gallery. "She'll grow up strong like you," Lena said, rocking her in the nursery. Dean kissed her shoulder and replied, "And kind like you." Friends came to visit, the press backed off, and the world slowed down for a while. In the quiet moments, Lena wrote letters to her daughter, telling her of battles won, fears faced, and love that grew even in ruin. Dean added notes between the pages, business advice, favorite memories, confessions only a father could give. And one evening, they read her their favorite line together, "No secret is ever too dark to be met with light." Years later, Lena's gallery had expanded into a cultural sanctuary, visited by thousands and curated by survivors who used color to speak. Dean had returned to building again not companies, but charities and creative spaces across the world. Their daughter, now 5, had already painted her first mural, bright swirls and crooked suns, that made international news. One visitor asked her, "Who taught you to paint like this?" And she smiled and pointed to both her parents. Dean and Lena watched from a distance, hand in hand, knowing everything they'd sacrificed had bloomed into this moment. Love didn't save them, Instantly, it saved them slowly, with every choice, and every brush stroke of their life was now on display. On a quiet evening, Lena stood in her private studio with a new canvas in front of her, blank, untouched, open. Dean entered with a cup of tea and asked, "Another?" She nodded and said, "The last." He watched as she painted not a person, but a moment. Two figures holding a child under the stars, surrounded by color, light, and shadows that no longer frightened them. When it was done, Dean kissed her softly and whispered, "Thank you for letting me find you." She smiled and replied, "Thank you for staying when you saw the truth." And as they stood there, arms around each other, their daughter giggling in the hallway behind them, the canvas dried, and so did the story that had once lived in secrets, now told in full color.